Hello again, and welcome back. I am McSnazzi, and today we are back in City Skylines for another episode of our Grand Haven series. Today we're going to do some fun stuff. We're going to start on the downtown, but before we get into that, please consider subscribing down below. It's completely free, and it really does help out the channel. Now, to get into this episode, we are going to be doing something a little different. We're going to get out of the suburb town that we've been pretty much working on the whole series on, and we're going to start working on the main downtown, main metropolis area of this area. Now, I have mentioned before, it's not going to be crazy populated. It's not going to be some like New York or something like that, some big giant city, but it's going to be fairly sized, and it's going to be sort of the normal sort of city you'd see, like maybe a state capital, something like that, but not anything like LA or New York or something like that. I'm going for more of a, well, at least I'm using cities like Seattle and Minneapolis and Detroit as sort of the basis of this, because I want to go for sort of a northern US style to this city, and I want it to be a big city, but I don't want it to be like a gigantic New York or LA style city. So those are really where I'm pulling a lot of the reference from, and I think that's the better comparison that you can make for this. Now, if you don't want to watch all the time-lapse, you can check down below. There's timestamps for you to go straight to the live portion of the episode where I go over the finished build and everything with commentary. So if you're more interested in that, consider doing that in the description down below. Now, we're going to expand here. I kind of wanted to take this main road from the industrial area and sort of make it, as I've discussed in the last episode, a main sort of road that kind of goes from Cornet all the way to the big city. I haven't named the big city yet. We're gonna do that soon. I'm not entirely sure what we're gonna do, but if you guys have any suggestions, please feel free to leave them down in the comments below. It would help out a bit, but I want to extend this rail line along with this main road, and really the start of this episode we're going to do a lot of highway work, trying to establish the fundamentals and the groundwork for the main downtown area, because if you look at any of these downtowns in real life and you check them on Google Maps, Google Earth, stuff like that, there are many extensive highway networks that connect the main city hub, like the downtown area, to the rest of the sort of metro area, to all the sort of little towns, well, not really little towns, but bigger like suburban cities around the big city and the downtown and all the more less populated areas of the big city to the main downtown area. There are highways coming in from every which direction, so that's sort of the style that I want to go for here. So we're going to do a little highway work, sort of making a lot of different connections that people can get to the main city from around the area. I'll go over this more in the real-time portion. I did cut out a lot of this highway editing because it does take a little bit of time, and it's kind of boring to watch the same thing over and over again, but all in all, just trying to get all those sort of highway connections into the main city so that there's not going to be traffic problems in the future, and I just want to get the groundwork right in order to make sort of this dense main city, because I feel like if we just don't do it that way, when we try to make the big city, there may be traffic problems, and then it's pretty hard to fix once you have a bunch of buildings down and all the setup that you want to do. So with that being said, that's why I did doing all this highway work in this episode. It's a little boring at the beginning, but I am going to cut a lot of it out. So we'll get into sort of doing the downtown layout, where we lay out the roads and we put down the sort of the skyline of the city, sort of the big skyscraper buildings that will be the sight line of the city when you're like driving to it from the highway, or you're out at sea or something like that. So that's really kind of the iconic thing of the city, and I took a lot of inspiration from the reference cities as well. I've always had trouble doing sort of the skyline for the city or starting in the downtown, because I tend to make it either too big or too small. It's hard to find a happy medium where it still looks realistic and good, because a lot of these big cities are pretty big, and even if they don't necessarily seem so, and the way they like put buildings on top of each other is just crazy sometimes. So trying to replicate that in the game the best I can. But here we're starting with some of this downtown road layout. I did a little bit of this off camera, so Basically, what I want to do in this episode is create sort of the big main streets, like the main streets that are sort of the hub streets where we'll have a lot of the big businesses and buildings on, and sort of the densest areas of the downtown. Build from the densest areas out and sort of sprawl back into the suburbs and things like that. And I don't want to go for necessarily only a grid or only like weird organic shapes or diagonals and stuff like that. I want a mix of everything. I want it to look realistic, but I also don't want to do just a grid, because a lot of these big cities are pretty much a big grid, and then the grid sort of fizzles out into the suburbs. So I want to mix some curve roads that look a little bit more organic, some diagonals, sort of like dueling grid action, stuff like that, but also stick to the grid a little bit, because sort of in these really dense downtown areas, just realistically speaking, are pretty grid heavy, especially the most dense areas. It just makes sense for the big buildings that they're putting there, things like that. Diagonals are kind of common, so we're going to put a few diagonals here, as you see here, and I'm pretty happy with how it turns out in the end when we get to the end here of the episode, when we do the real-time walkthrough of how the road layout so far. It's all subject to change. It could change in the next episode, it could not change in the next episode. I'm not entirely sure at this moment, but I'm happy with what we end up creating in the end, and it's pretty dense for the most part. So what I want to put at the city, there's quite a few big things that I want to fit into this sort of main area, and I hope we have enough space to do all of this, and it's going to take a little bit of planning on my part in order to make sure we have these sort of areas separated a little bit and sort of flowing as well, so they're connected and separated at the same time, kind of like a big city would be. We need to put in a bunch of public transport. I want to do a metro, and I've never really done trams in the game, so I think trams will be a fun thing to try to play with and do. So that's one of the big goals of mine. I want to put in some sports arenas. I want to put in like an opera house, stuff like that. I have sort of an idea of where I want to put the opera house already. Not sure where I want to put a basketball arena or a football field, something. These big things that you see, and they're pretty common in American cities, that I'd like to put into this build just to add to the realism and things like that. I also want to play around with the campus DLC. I've never actually played around with it yet, so I kind of wanted to build a university in the city. I'm not sure where I'm going to put it, but we'll get to that when we get to that, but that's one of the big goals of mine as well. On top of that, I also kind of want to mess around with the tourism, maybe put a casino or two in, something like that. Leisures, big hotels, never really played with the idea of that. Maybe play around with the beaches a little, but we are pretty north, so the beaches would only really be used in the summertime. If that, it'd probably be pretty cold anyway. So maybe not so much a focus on the beaches, but, tourism, hotels, leisure, the casinos and things like that. And definitely want to do a big hospital. I'm going to get an asset off the workshop. I haven't really looked at those yet, but I plan on doing like a big hospital complex. Just makes sense. It's realistic in like a big city area, especially as north as this city is, being in the valley of these mountains. It would probably be a hub for medical treatment. So we're going to do something like that as well. And I also kind of want to play around with the Sunset Harbor DLC, work on a fishing industry, things like that. Those are the main goals at the moment. We'll see. There's probably some other things that I can't think of off the top of my head, but now we're going to start working about laying out this downtown area. Really sort of the strategy here is make everything pretty close together. We're going to put buildings on top of each other. Some of these growable buildings, we're going to sort of use Move It to put them really right on top of each other, so they kind of fit together very closely. This is sort of pretty common in sort of dense downtown areas, and that's what I'm doing here. You're going to see me sort of scroll back and look at the sight line a lot to see if I like how it looks, because I don't want it to be too crazy. I don't want any of the buildings to be way taller than the other ones. I want it to sort of build up to the middle, and that's sort of what we're going here. Now, I don't know if I'm going to use a ton of assets for these buildings. Right now, these are all vanilla growables that I'm placing here, along with sort of assets that are the monuments in the game as well. I believe I only have one skyscraper asset, and that is the tallest one that we have, that sort of middle run right there with the pole on the top. That is the only asset we have at the moment. I may go look on the workshop, do a little bit of a peek to try to find, you know, some more skyscrapers that maybe look a little better than this, but I kind of like how it's built up when we get to the end of the episode, as you'll see. But I also want to find, you know, a hospital asset, maybe some fire department and police department assets for like big city fire departments and things like that. So look out in the collection for those to be added, probably within the next episode, whenever that will be released. But as of this episode coming out now, nothing's changed to the collection in the description down below. As I will restate, all the mods and assets that I use in this series are in the description collection down below. You can check it out there if you want to use anything that I use on the screen here. So we're also going to put some parking garages here and there. It's pretty common in the dense downtown areas. Using the references from Detroit, there is a lot of parking lots. I don't know if that's very characteristic of like actual big cities, because a lot of the other cities don't have as many parking lots. It makes sense for Detroit struggling a little bit, you know, over the recent 20 years or so. So there's probably a lot of buildings that have been torn down, turned into parking lot space. So that makes sense for that. So I don't know if I'll do that a ton here. Might put in a few parking lots, but we're going to pretty much focus on parking garages in order to deal with the parking here. So what I really don't want to do is go straight up to the water here. That's why I'm kind of bringing the downtown back a little bit from the water, and maybe put some nice apartments or hotels on the water, something like that. Not entirely sure. Some of this could change in the next episode, but for now I think I'm happy with sort of the densest strip of the downtown being finished, with these buildings all sort of piled on top of each other, looking pretty realistic by doing this. But we're going to jump into the real-time portion here in just a second. At the end of the time lapse in a moment. So I'll see you guys in a second in the real-time portion. Alright everybody, welcome back to the real-time portion of the episode. We're going to go over everything that we did in this week's episode, and we did quite a bit here with an emphasis on doing sort of this downtown layout. We've primarily been working on the suburb town of Cornet throughout the whole series so far, and now we're sort of getting into the big city that we've been teasing the entire series. And it's really shaping up to look good. This is sort of the framework we're going to have for this downtown area, and everything you see on the other side of where my cursor is right now is brand new for this episode. So not a ton of like building little individual things, but a lot of big picture sort of framework for the downtown of the big city. Still unnamed, so if you have any suggestions down below, please put them in the comments and we'll get this big city named. But we started over here. This is the industrial area we did in the last episode. I just wanted to extend everything along this way. I wanted to have this sort of highway system going out of the map, and we're going to do that at some point. But it's just going to end there for now. And really, I wanted to hammer down these highway entry points for the downtown area, as I've been doing a lot of research on Google Maps and Google Earth to see realistic cities and sort of my reference cities on what they do for highway layout. And there's a lot of highways that sort of connect into the big dense downtown hub. So that's what I'm trying to do here. We brought this highway over all the way, but we also added some intersections, added this new strip of highway that's going to connect there, and added this, changed this from a three-way that was just going this way into a four-way intersection, which also cuts into right here. So there's lots of areas in highway, and we'll have some highway exits throughout, so people could get straight to the downtown very quickly. They don't have to go on crowded big roads, and that'll hopefully work on fixing any future traffic problems that we may have in the city, and I'm trying to be proactive about that for the most part. Over here we're going to do sort of the same thing. I think this will be a four-way. This one will go out of the map. This will be over to one of the plans I want to do is like a nuclear power plant over here that's going to pretty much power the whole area. And I have some cool assets from the workshop for that, but we're nowhere near doing that just yet. So this will be a four-way intersection. This will connect straight up to a main road here for sure. But here is the downtown layout. We've done a little bit of this highway. We did all these little intersections and bridges and things like that as well. Not as exciting as doing these big downtown buildings here that this little downtown strip looks pretty good already, and I'm really excited to continue it even more. I wanted to go for, a nice sort of sightline and skyline here, but I didn't want to overdo it, as this isn't going to be some super like humongous metropolis city like New York or LA or San Francisco or something like that. It's just gonna be, more like a Seattle or Minneapolis or Detroit, something like that. A bigger city, but nothing too crazy. So for the downtown layout here, I wanted to stick away from just doing a simple grid everywhere. So, we did a little bit of grid action, which is pretty common for downtown areas and pretty realistic, but added in some curves, added in some smaller roads that sort of cut up this grid and sort of make it more interesting. Over in this area, this looks a little weird, but I have the plans of making this sort of like a park. Potentially, I might just put an opera house right here, the opera house asset we have in the game, and then sort of densify this up, but the opera house is sort of around the water, something like that. Not sure yet, just speculation. That's why I sort of left these water pools here. They may change. Over here, definitely may change. I think the big plans for this area is sort of make a city capital or potentially a state capital. Couple Congress buildings there as well. Another project I want to do. There's a few projects I want to get done in this big city, so I gotta leave space for all of them. We're gonna put in an airport at some point, a university, some casinos, sort of like some hotels, stuff like that. But for now, these are just commercial buildings. There's some residential mixed in here, all vanilla growables, all ploppable assets that you get when you sort of work in the vanilla game. The only asset that is not vanilla is this big tower right here. This is in the asset collection, though, in the description down below if you want this asset. So it is down there if you need it. Otherwise, these are just either monuments, like the transport tower is a monument in the game, or just regular vanilla growables, just placed using the Find It tool. Put in a couple of parking garages, sort of added these together. This is the same building over and over again to make it look like it's sort of a bigger sort of shopping building, something like that, and just kind of putting buildings on top of each other to get that feel of the big city. This is a very dense downtown. This is going to be pretty much the densest block of the whole city in my mind, so that's why lots of big skyscraper buildings placed on top of each other, lots of offices, businesses, and residential buildings as well. So that's pretty much it for this episode. Downtown layout's looking very nice. We're going to make this very dense, and we're going to sort of sprawl out from here along this coast. I'm not sure how dense it's going to be or how many things we're going to put in. I definitely want to put in some ports, industry, some of the fishing stuff that we have in the new DLC. This library may change. I just put it here for now. I think it looks pretty nice, but it could change. Vanilla asset as well. A lot of these are vanilla assets, trying to keep it like that, but I also go on the workshop. I want to get a big hospital asset to put a hospital complex, some fire department, police department, stuff like that. Got to put in some public transit as well. We got a lot to do, but it's exciting. This is the framework for the series, for the big city, and I'm really excited to get started and continue this project. So if you guys did enjoy the video, please leave a like down below. Leave a comment if you have a suggestion to name the city or just want to say something about the episode. Please consider subscribing if you haven't already. It's completely free, really does help out the channel. Check out my Twitter for screenshots of builds and alerts for new episodes when they do release. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I really enjoyed making it. I'm really excited to continue this series and build even more stuff. But until next time, I am McSnazzi, and I'll see you in the next one.